Everyone is bound by the same math, 24 hours a day. Turning those hours into security requires direct physical labor. But while the clock ticks at the same speed for everyone, how we choose to use that time leads to two very different futures. This is the reality facing a small village in a valley, where a water shortage has created a massive problem and a massive opportunity for anyone who can solve it. Two men, Pablo and Bruno, were hired to haul water from a mountain spring down to the village. The contract was simple. They were paid strictly for the volume of water they delivered. 1 bucket of water equaled 1 unit of pay. At the start, both men were on equal footing. They had the same youth, the same physical strength, and the same chance to earn a living by meeting the town's demand. This setup is the foundation of the modern working life. Most people begin by signing this exact contract, an exchange of limited human energy for a fixed financial return. Bruno saw a clear path to wealth: work harder. He began making more frequent trips to the spring and eventually traded his standard buckets for much larger ones. By increasing his physical output, he immediately saw his income rise. The results were visible almost immediately. Bruno bought the house he wanted, purchased a cow, and spent evenings at the tavern, enjoying the fruits of his labor. Because his efforts were being rewarded so quickly, Bruno was convinced he had found the perfect strategy. He believed that as long as his body held out, his lifestyle was secure. In the modern workforce, we often follow Bruno's lead, taking extra shifts, pushing for overtime, or striving for raises that demand more attention. This is carrying a bigger bucket. It feels like progress because the paycheck grows, but Bruno's success relied on a fragile assumption. His entire livelihood depended on his physical presence and his peak health. If either of those failed, his income would vanish. Pablo soon realized the cost of the work. His hands were raw, and his body was becoming exhausted. He understood that he was one injury or one illness away from losing everything he had worked for. He realized that if he wanted to keep earning even when his body needed rest, he had to build a system that could move water without his hands being on the buckets. He needed to separate the act of working from the act of earning. Pablo began a double life. During the day, he carried buckets just to survive and pay his bills. But in his evenings and on weekends, he used his remaining energy to begin digging a pipeline through the Rocky Mountain terrain. This decision came with a high price. While Bruno was relaxing, Pablo was working harder for less immediate pay. The villagers laughed at him, calling him Pablo the Pipeline Man as they watched him struggle through the mud and rock. Building something that lasts requires the discipline to endure this period of social pressure. You have to be willing to accept a lower status in the short term for a much greater outcome later. Years later, the toll of the labor became undeniable. Bruno was no longer the strong young man he used to be. His back was hunched and his movements were slow. The heavy buckets he once carried with ease were now a burden he could barely manage. Because Bruno's income was tied directly to his physical stamina, his pay dropped as his health declined. The bigger buckets he relied on were now half empty, and his financial security began to collapse. But while Bruno was fading, Pablo's years of quiet work finally reached the finish line. The pipeline was finished. For the first time, water flowed into the village automatically. It didn't matter if Pablo was at the spring or at home. The water moved, the villagers paid, and the revenue flowed to him without additional effort. Their paths had completely diverged. Bruno had spent his life maintaining a process that required him to be the engine. Pablo had spent his life building a system that could run on its own. The result was total. Pablo could travel or sleep and still grow wealthier, while Bruno found himself without the physical strength to earn a living. In our world, the bucket is a metaphor for the wage labor trap. It is any job where your income is tied to the clock. If you aren't present, the water doesn't move, and you aren't paid. A pipeline is any asset where the work is front-loaded. When you build a business that functions without your daily supervision, or create a piece of intellectual property, like a book or software, you are building a pipe. Just as the water flows through the pipe after the construction is finished, these assets provide value to others and income to you long after the initial work is done. We must all face the reality that our time and health are finite. Eventually, for everyone,
the ability to carry buckets will reach its limit. Real security doesn't come from finding a heavier bucket to carry. It comes from the decision to start digging your own pipeline today, meter by meter, until the system can carry the weight for you.